Hi guys, so I just want to show you how to do a fairly good-sized crown. We're starting here from basically scratch. I'll show you the room in just a second. And I'm going to show you each step of how I would do this crown solo, but have it look nice. This is a paint grade MDF crown. It's a 5-inch wide crown, and I'll show you that profile in just a second. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is give you a little idea of the overall appearance of the room right now. I don't have a lot of light here, but I've already just barely started on it, so I thought I'll take a moment to show you what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to go over a couple of the tools that I use every time I'm doing crown. This is an 8.5-inch compound slider. This is a DeWalt. I've had it for about 15 years. It's been fantastic. And having some sort of a stand to give you support is really essential. I bought this one, again, about 10, 15 years ago, and it's been a fantastic setup for me. Of course, they don't make either one anymore, but there you go. I'm also just using a very small Senko, I think it's a 1-gallon compressor. When I'm doing stuff like this by myself, I don't usually have to do anything beyond that. Okay, so these are just a few of the tools that I use for every single crown molding job, and in fact most of these I use for every type of trim job. First off here, I have a digital tape measure, laser tape measure. This is just a Bosch DLR 130, which was fairly inexpensive. I think it was about $70 on Amazon, and I purchased that after several years of trying to use a tape measure and do these jobs solo. This works a whole lot better. Basically, it shoots a laser line, and then it bounces back to wherever that laser is. It gives you that measurement. Just push the button again, and it gives you very accurate measurements. If anything, I'd say it's a little long, maybe a 1/16 of an inch long. Another thing mostly overlooked by finish carpenters is a little notepad. I've created it for myself, a certain code, which these are real figures. The length that I would look at it from my view. Then on my left side, if I'm facing that piece of trim, that crown molding, I have OC, which is outside corner. My angle is 46. Right side of that piece is inside corner, and that's a 45-degree miter. So that saves me a tremendous amount of traveling, squinting, trying to look at those measurements or remember what I had. And I also don't have to try and figure out, well, which way was it. Another tool, this is just an old brad nailer I have. I prefer them when they have hooks. It makes things a whole lot easier. This one's about on its last leg. Here I've got a rigid, this is an angled finish gun. It shoots 15-inch NA nails, I believe they are. Wasn't too expensive, but again, it's got that hook. That one's a little heavy to have hooked on your belt, but it's still well worth it. Third tool, it's indispensable. This is a Starrett angle finder. It'll show me the miter angle wherever this is, which I've used on this job. Or if I just want to figure out what the overall angle of a cut would be, it'll show me that one. So I don't have to do any calculating. It's all configured based on a chop saw's angles. Also, I just have a little Senko compressor. This is, I think, 1.5 gallons. And I use this because so many of these jobs are small. It keeps me portable. And I've got my trusty old chop saw. This is a DeWalt 8.5-inch, which is fairly small, but since this crown is big, I'm going to be doing it laying flat. And the stand here, I've had all of that set up for about 10 or 12 years, so it's been a very good setup. Obviously, I've had to do a little bit of cobbling things together, but mostly this is a fantastic setup. So what I do whenever I'm going to do crown is I make something like this. This is basically just an inside corner And the reason I do this is because anytime you have compound in the corner, it always builds it up. But your contact points are going to be out here and out here. Whoops, there we go. Out here and here. They're not going to be in here. So if I were to just measure from here down, it's not going to be an accurate measurement. The difference from here to where the crown is making contact with the ceiling could be as much as 1/8 of an inch. So what I do, as I mentioned, is I'll make an inside corner like this, and as you can see, I don't particularly care if the nails pop through. And what I do is I just hold it up to the corner, make sure that my ceiling is tight. I get the wall as tight as I can, but this is a true 90-degree angle, and the walls typically aren't. But what I'm more concerned about is that the ceiling is making a full contact as much of that length as I can. So I don't make it too small, because especially this crown is fairly good sized. So I want it to give me as accurate a read as possible. So this is about 18 inches from point to point. And because this is a good sized, let me take out a tape measure here, give you an idea. Yeah, we're looking at, actually this looks like it's about a 6-inch crown there. So that's pretty beefy. And it's built up from 3/4. So another tool that I always use whenever I'm doing crown. So here you see my chalk line has now been snapped all the way around, and I'm going to be stopping the crown at that outside corner, and I've got it to over here. So at that point, what I'm going to do is each corner, I'm going to use my handy dandy Starrett tool here, because what you'll find as you do this, can't really show you there, is your angles are not going to be exactly at a 45 as you would think they are. So here it tells you the angle at the miter cut there. Looks like it's about 46 degrees, just under 46 degrees, so that little arrow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark 46 degrees on there, and that tells me that each side of this crown, for me to get a miter to line up and everything to look nice and pretty, minimal caulk, is for me to cut it at 46 degrees. But sometimes you don't need to do that if you're going to actually cope into these corners, but that's for another video. So we're going to assume that we're going to do a mitered corner on each of these, even the inside corners and obviously the outside corners. And I'll put a little glue in that joint. For MDF, that typically works a little better, because if I tried to cope it in, it's usually going to get crushed when I put it in there. So not to go into too much of a rabbit hole there, but basically we're going to miter all of these corners. So I'm going to go around now, all of my corners, and I'm going to mark this angle, and then I'm actually going to use my laser. I'm going to measure from along this line all the way down to the end, if I can, if it's long enough, which I don't think it will be, or otherwise I'll find a good stopping point here, and I'll just mark the one piece here and kind of go from there. So I'll just mark that measurement right above the line, and I'll probably even go through and mark out my studs for this, but I'll show you that in just a second. Okay, what I've done while I was off video, we've got some crown backer. This is just some 3/4 plywood that's cut. Unfortunately, this was produced with not quite the right angle, but it's close enough, and that'll give me something solid to nail into, and I can nail these things up to my top plate of the wall. Just make sure everything's solid. I can glue that in, and I don't have to have a million nails in my crown. Also, I've marked out my chalk line, which is from corner to corner. I actually used my laser, and I got the measurement So this piece, and I write it nice and bold above the line, so it's one less thing I have to deal with erasing. And if you can see those little ticks, those little marks, those are the studs that I could find easily by using, I should have shown this in my previous video, this little contraption, which is, as you can tell, homemade. What it is it's a piece of spring steel, like you get off of pallets. It's holding lumber together. And I put a couple of rare earth magnets. I think these are 1 inch by 1/8 inch thick. I just got them from Home Depot. I put them on there, and then I wrap electrical tape around it. And obviously this needs to get a little bit of cleaning up. But what that allows me to do is now I can take this, and it won't scratch the wall. I can take this and I can pass it until it finds something. And because they're rare earth magnets or neodymium magnets, they actually grab fairly well. And then I just take my pencil and I mark just through that line. That tells me where I need to nail through. Okay, so far I'm up to about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes in what I've done thus far. So as you can see, I put up my crown backer and I space it out intentionally. That gives me some room for adjustment when the ceiling is a little goofy. And I always leave it at least a foot away from the inside corners and the outside corners, because that allows me to just tweak those in case, which there typically is, some strangeness going on these corners. So I'm going to take lunch and then I'll start working on the crown. Okay, so we're back, and I'm going to go ahead and actually show you how to do the crown molding. This is that 6-inch wide, very elaborate colonial MDF molding, and I'm going to be mitering these angles. Because I'm not going to be coping into the inside corners, and my chop saw is not big enough to actually stand up this crown molding, which I'm sure you've seen guys do that upside down and backwards with their chop saw. My saw is not quite big enough for that, so I'm going to do it the technical way, which is laying it on the flat. In order to do that, we have to make sure that the miter angle, in other words, how you change the handle or the table of your chop saw, and the bevel angle, that's the actual saw head itself, those have to match up exactly, or you'll end up having a screwy corner that you have to fight with and end up ultimately filling with caulk. I don't like to do that, so I like to be careful about it. So I use an app which I'll reference in my notes. It's called Crown Angle. It is an iPhone app. It's very, very simple. You indicate to the app what it calls it the spring angle off the wall of your crown molding. If the palm of my hand here were the wall, and your crown molding angle, that's called the spring angle. So we just tell it what's the spring angle of our crown, which in our case it's 50 degrees, which is unusual, and what your inside or outside corner is. And from that point you just punch it in, and it automatically calculates what your bevel and miter angles need to be for any type of crown and any type of inside or outside corner. So I'll show you how that looks in just a second. Okay, so according to my Spring Angle app, which you could of course get a little booklet on crown molding, it says that for a 50-degree spring angle on my crown, I need to have a 37.5 degree bevel, miter, and my saw angle, in fact I'll turn that back just for a second so you can see it more easily. My saw angle over here, that bevel angle needs to turn out to be 27 degrees. So I'll have to set that in a second when I have two hands free, but so my bevel here will be 27 degrees and my miter angle will be 37.5 degrees. Now that's only for a true 90-degree corner, and of course most of the time we don't have that. So if I need to adjust that, there will be very fine incremental adjustments on my bevel and my, my miter and my bevel angles. So I'm going to go ahead and start that, and then you'll see how that looks when I'm all done. Okay, so my first inside corner is actually, ironically, a true 45-degree inside miter. So I've got my bevel angle set to 27. I've got my miter angle set to 37.5. I know it doesn't look like it, but it is. And this gives me a true 90-degree inside corner, which matches up with my first inside corner. So now I have to calculate for my next inside corner on that same piece to be 44 degrees. So that's where this app really helps me out. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull my measurement. I've adjusted my miter saw. This is my true 45 degree. And I'm going to go down here. And I've got 155 and 15/16. And that gives me my long point on my crown molding. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut that piece. And this will give me a 44-degree miter on this side and a 45 on the other. Okay, so since I'm doing this solo, what I've done to replace my helper is I just take a nail. It's actually the same location as I had for my chalk line. I just rest that crown right on there. I get it close to that corner. And then I go ahead and check my other side and I tack that in. Right now this only has about 3 nails, and I put them straight into the studs where I was able to. And I put it through a nice beefy section of that crown. And what I'm doing is, you'll see I haven't actually nailed anything into the ceiling just yet. And the reason I do that is I want to make sure that I can get this adjusted to that blue chalk line as closely as I can. So the way that I would do that, you see, like right now I can twist it. I'm going to have to take that nail out to do that. But if I twist it or move it up or down, I can get to that chalk line, and that helps me to maintain a nice straight line on that bottom. Okay, so I just cut a scrap here. I'm just kind of holding it in place, but you can see that miter worked out really nice. So minimal caulking will be necessary. That's really what we're aiming for, because now I can glue that joint and it won't be likely to crack later on. Especially with stain grade crown, you really want to keep those joints tight. Okay, so on my long pieces, I need to have a joint on these pieces of crown. So what I try to do is I try to make these, I call them scarf joints, or I try to make them as invisible as possible. So what I usually do is I turn my saw bevel back to 0. Sorry, I keep doing that. My miter back to 0, and my bevel I turn to 30, and that's just a standard rule I set for it. You could go 45. I typically don't, but the main thing is that whatever your angle is that you always use the same scarf joint angle. So now I'm going to put this piece up, and I've cut it so that it dies basically in the center of some of my blocking, and that'll help that joint to keep from cracking. If I didn't have blocking on a lighter gauge crown, I would actually put a piece of plywood or some other wood behind this joint, glued and pin nailed or brad nailed on there to make sure that this joint doesn't crack. And definitely don't do an angle cut like that. It always looks like garbage because it always cracks. If you do a 90 or 0 angle on your miter, then you're usually going to be in pretty good shape. Okay, so this is a typical situation. So my bottom is looking good, my miter is looking good. Unfortunately, the ceiling fades away a little bit there. So what I did is I put a shim in there, get that joint nice and tight, and I'm going to wait for that to dry, and then I'm going to go ahead and cut that shim, and I'll just caulk that top edge after I get everything all nailed in. And I still have not nailed in my top to the ceiling. The only thing that's holding this in place right now is the nails on the wall. That way I can get it to that blue line. It's nice and straight. By the way, I thought I'd just show you this little trick in case you've got a small chop saw stand like I do, and you're dealing with 16-foot lengths by yourself, or you don't want to tie up a helper, just set up a ladder, closest rung. That way you're not having to fight the weight of the board. So this is what you will do when you have a very long piece that you need to join together. So as I mentioned, you're going to be using, typically you'll use like a 30-degree bevel with a 0 angle. So when you need to measure, what you do is you need to determine, for me I typically go with wherever that molding intersects the wall at that exact point. And from there, I measure all the way down to exactly where that blue line intersects. So now I just gotta cut it. So this is what one of these joints is gonna look like when you're all done. Actually, this is only partly done because I just wiped it down. So it's got some wood glue in there. And then on these are actually brad nails, so they don't leave a big hole. Try to not, machine gun it. And then I just finished adjusting it down to that blue line, and wipe it down with a damp rag, and that's ready for a little bit of love with some putty. Okay, and so this is where I'm at so far. Sadly, I have to go to another job. So that was roughly, it looks like about 4 hours of work for me solo, including a half an hour lunch. So not too bad, but that gives you a start.
Okay guys, so I hope that was helpful. If so, please feel free to share that video with others, and we'll have another lesson for you coming up as soon as I have an opportunity. Have a great day.